He's only a baby. He hasn't done anything. Don't take my Kuba.
There was a loud knock at the door, and before we could even react, two people walked in with papers in their hands. One of them said coldly, "We are here from Velferd. Step aside. We need to take the child." I held Jakub tighter in my arms. Marek moved in front of the doorway, his voice shaking with anger. "You can't just walk in and steal our son. We've done nothing wrong." The officer's eyes were sharp, his voice without mercy. "Feeding a child with your hands is unsafe. This is not how we raise children in Norway. The boy is coming with us." They pulled Jakub from me as he screamed, "Mama." I fell to the floor in tears. That was the day my world collapsed. My name is Anna Kowalska, and I never imagined that one day I would be begging strangers not to take away my baby. 1 year ago, my husband Marek and I packed our entire lives into 2 suitcases, holding our 5-month-old son Jakub in our arms, and boarded a flight from Warsaw to Oslo. At that moment, we were not running away from anything, we were running toward a dream. I still remember stepping out of Oslo airport for the first time. The cold air hit my face, sharp and clean, so different from the busy streets of Warsaw. Marek squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is it, Anna. A new beginning." I looked down at Jakub, wrapped in his tiny blue blanket, sleeping peacefully against my chest. My heart was bursting with hope. We had read so much about Norway before coming here. Articles praising the education system, documentaries showing happy children playing freely in the snow, websites describing the country as one of the safest in the world. We told ourselves that Jakub would grow up with endless opportunities, that in Norway, he could truly become anything he wanted. Marek dreamed of Jakub becoming an engineer. I imagined him as a doctor, maybe even a pianist. What mattered most was that he would be free, safe, and loved. Back in Poland, life was hard. Marek worked long shifts at a factory, barely earning enough for rent. I stayed home with Jakub, relying on my parents for help. We wanted more than survival. We wanted dignity, stability, and a future where our son would not inherit our struggles. Norway seemed like the answer to every prayer. When we first rented our little apartment in Oslo, it felt like paradise. The place was small, just 1 bedroom, a living area, and a kitchen, but it was ours. I decorated Jakub's corner with a second-hand crib, colorful blankets, and a shelf of baby books I found at a flea market. Marek built a wooden toy car with his own hands, and every evening after work, he would push Jakub around the living room as our son laughed with pure joy. Every detail of our new life felt like a promise. I would cook warm Polish meals, filling the air with the smell of pierogi and bigos. Marek would come home tired but smiling, lifting Jakub into his arms. We would sit on the small balcony, drinking tea, watching the sunset over the quiet street below. For the first time in our lives, we felt that tomorrow would always be better than today. Of course, we carried our traditions with us. In Poland, mothers often feed their young children by hand, especially during the first years when they are learning to eat solid food. It's more than just feeding, it is a bond. When I held a piece of soft bread or fruit in my fingers and placed it gently into Jakub's mouth, I was not only nourishing his body. I was teaching him trust, closeness, and love. He would grab my hand with his tiny fingers, his eyes shining with happiness, and laugh as he chewed clumsily. Those moments felt sacred, like a ritual passed down from my mother, my grandmother, and countless generations before them. I never thought of it as wrong. Why would I? In our culture, this was normal. It was how I was raised, how Marek was raised, how every child in our village was raised. And yet, I would soon learn that what felt like love to me could be twisted into neglect in the eyes of strangers. But in those early days, I saw no shadows. Only light. We joined a local Polish community in Oslo. On Sundays, we attended Mass in a small church where Polish families gathered, sharing stories of work, children, and life in Norway. Some warned us quietly, whispering about families who had lost their children to barnevernet, the welfare system. But I brushed it aside, thinking, that will never happen to us. We love our son too much. We are good parents. I remember one snowy afternoon when Marek and I took Jakub to a park near our apartment. Jakub was just learning to walk. His tiny boots sank into the snow as he held Marek's hand for balance. He looked up at the sky, watching the flakes fall on his cheeks, and laughed so hard that strangers stopped to smile at him. I thought to myself, this is why we came here. So he could have moments like this. Marek worked on construction sites, sometimes 12 hours a day, but he never complained. Every time he looked at Jakub, I could see his pride. "Everything I do is for you, Kuba," he would whisper, kissing our son's forehead before leaving for work. At home, I poured every ounce of love into raising Jakub. Feeding him, singing Polish lullabies, teaching him the first words of our language. "Mama," I would say, pointing to myself. He repeated it with a wide grin. My heart would melt every time. I kept a journal during those months, filling it with little notes about Jakub's growth. December 14th, Kuba said Tata for the first time. January 7th, he took 3 steps before falling into my arms. February 2nd, he fed me a piece of bread with his tiny hand and giggled. Those pages were proof of our happiness, of our love. I thought they would be memories to treasure. I never imagined they would become reminders of what we almost lost. Because while we were dreaming, while we were building our fragile new life, someone else was watching. Someone who did not see the laughter, the warmth, or the love. They saw only a different culture, a different way of parenting. And in their eyes, different meant dangerous. The first time Velferd knocked on our door, I felt nervous but not afraid. They said it was a routine check, something that happened often with immigrant families. 2 officers entered politely, asking questions about our home, our income, and how we cared for Jakub. I answered honestly, smiling, trying to show them that we were a normal family. But then, one of them noticed me feeding Jakub by hand. I was holding a small piece of bread, letting him chew on it while sitting on my lap. The officer's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't do that," he said in Norwegian. His tone was sharp, judgmental. I quickly explained, "This is how we do it in Poland. It is safe. It is love." But I could see he was not convinced. After they left, Marek tried to calm me down. "Don't worry, Anna. We've done nothing wrong. They can't hurt us." But deep inside, a seed of fear began to grow. What if they didn't understand? What if love was not enough here? That night, I held Jakub as he slept, watching his chest rise and fall. I whispered, "I will protect you, my son. No one will take you from me." I believed it. I had to believe it. But as I look back now, I realize that was the moment when our dream began to crack. The moment when the paradise we thought we had found revealed its first shadow. After that first visit, I tried to push away the unease in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, just a misunderstanding. Surely they would see that we were a normal, loving family. But the truth is, once Velferd steps into your life, they never really leave. It started small. Letters in the mail. Calls I didn't understand because my Norwegian was still broken. They asked for more home visits, more observations. At first, I agreed willingly. I thought if we opened our doors, if we smiled and showed them our love for Jakub, they would leave us in peace. I was wrong. The second time they came, it was a cold March morning. Snow clung stubbornly to the streets, even though spring should have been near. Jakub was sitting on the floor, playing with the wooden toy car Marek had built for him. His laughter filled the apartment, the kind of pure sound that makes your heart ache with joy. When the knock came, my stomach tightened. I opened the door, and two different officers stood there. One was a woman with sharp glasses and a clipboard. The other was a younger man with a polite but distant smile. "Routine check," the woman said in slow English when she saw the confusion on my face. "We need to see the child." I nodded and stepped aside. Jakub crawled toward me, clinging to my leg as if he sensed something was wrong. I picked him up and kissed his forehead, whispering, "It's okay, Kuba. Mama's here." They looked around the apartment, scribbling notes. The woman opened cupboards, checked the fridge, measured the temperature in the bedroom. She asked questions in clipped sentences. "Where does he sleep? How many hours? What do you feed him?" I answered as best I could, switching between broken Norwegian and English. "He sleeps with us sometimes, in our bed, but usually in crib. He eats bread, soup, potatoes, fruits. He is healthy, strong." When I fed him a piece of soft banana with my hand, Jakub giggled and smeared the fruit on my cheek. My heart swelled. But when I glanced up, I saw the woman's face harden. She wrote something quickly on her clipboard. "Why do you feed him with your hand?" she asked, voice flat. "It's our way," I explained, smiling nervously. "In Poland, mothers feed like this. It is normal. Safe. He eats better this way." Her pen scratched harder. "In Norway," she said, "children should eat independently. Or with utensils. Not from the hand. This can be unhygienic. Unsafe." I felt heat rising in my chest. But he is only 1 year. He is learning. He takes spoons sometimes, but also my hand. He is healthy. Look, I held Jakub up. His cheeks were rosy, his body strong. He is not sick. He is happy. The younger officer gave a polite smile, but it did not reach his eyes. They left after an hour, but the silence they left behind was heavier than before. That evening, when Marek came home, I told him everything. His face darkened as he listened. "They don't understand, Anna. They don't see the love. They only see difference. But difference is not wrong." I nodded, but the seed of fear inside me had grown into a thorn. A week later, another letter arrived. They wanted us to attend a meeting at their office. Marek took a day off work, and together we walked into the gray building, Jakub in my arms. The walls smelled of disinfectant, and the waiting area was filled with other parents, some crying quietly, some staring blankly at the floor. When our names were called, we entered a small room. Across the table sat two women, both with files in front of them. One of them began to speak in Norwegian, too fast for me to follow. Marek tried to translate, but even he struggled. Finally, they switched to English. "We have concerns," one of them said, folding her hands neatly. "About feeding practices. About sleeping arrangements. About the size of your home." I stared at her, my heart racing. Concerns? But Jakub is fine. He is strong, he is happy. He has everything he needs. The other woman shook her head. "Our reports indicate otherwise. Feeding with hands is not acceptable here. It is a risk. The child must eat properly, with utensils. And the home," she glanced at her notes. "Too small for healthy development." Marek leaned forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "We are doing everything we can. I work long hours. My wife cares for him every moment. He is loved. You cannot say our love is not enough because our apartment is small. The women remained unmoved. One of them said calmly, "We will continue to monitor. If improvements are not seen, we may need to take further action." Those words struck me like a knife. Further action. I clutched Jakub tighter, tears blurring my vision. When we left the building, I could barely breathe. Marek put his arm around me, whispering, "Don't cry, Anna. We will fight this. They can't take him. They won't." But deep inside, I already felt the ground shifting beneath us. The third visit came suddenly, without warning. Jakub was napping when the knock echoed through the apartment. 2 officers entered, this time with a stern-faced man who introduced himself as a supervisor. They inspected everything again. The fridge, the bathroom, the crib. The supervisor watched silently as I tried to explain, his face unreadable. Then he asked me to demonstrate how I fed Jakub. My hands shook as I held out a small piece of bread. Jakub woke, toddled over, and eagerly opened his mouth. I fed him gently, the way I always did, the way my mother fed me. The supervisor's expression turned to stone. He scribbled something in his report. Then he looked at me and said words I will never forget, "This is not how children should be raised in Norway." I felt my knees weaken. "But, this is love," I whispered. He closed his file. "Love must be shown in ways that are safe. We will be in touch." They left without another word. The silence in the apartment pressed down on me like a weight I could not lift. Jakub tugged at my skirt, smiling innocently, and I sank to the floor, holding him so tightly he squirmed. Marek came home late that night. When I told him, his face crumpled with rage and helplessness. "They don't care about us, Anna. To them, we are just immigrants. Foreigners who don't belong. They don't see Jakub as a child, they see him as a case file." I cried into his chest, whispering, "What if they take him?" He held me close, his voice breaking. "Then we will fight until our last breath." Looking back, I realized those were the signs. The warnings. Every knock on the door, every note on a clipboard, every cold glance, they were building a case against us. And yet, I clung to hope. I told myself that in the end, love would speak louder than reports. That surely, no system could be so cruel as to take a child from parents who adored him. But I was wrong. Because the very thing that I thought proved my love, the gentle act of feeding my son with my own hands, was already being twisted into the reason they would come back. And the next time, they would not leave Jakub behind. It was a gray morning in late April when the knock came again. By then, I had grown to dread that sound. Every time it echoed through the walls of our small apartment, my heart would seize, as if it already knew what was coming. Marek was at work that day, leaving me alone with Jakub. He was playing on the floor with his wooden toy car, laughing in that carefree way only a child can. The sound of his joy clashed with the heaviness in my chest as I opened the door. This time, there were 3 of them. 2 officers and the supervisor from before. Their faces were unreadable, but their eyes carried the weight of a decision already made. "Anna Kowalska?" the supervisor asked. I nodded, clutching Jakub instinctively. "We have determined that immediate action must be taken for the welfare of your child. Jakub is being placed in temporary custody." The words tore through me. "No. No, you can't. Please." My voice broke as Jakub clung to my neck, sensing my fear. He began to cry, small arms tightening around me. "You can't just take him." I screamed. "He is my son. He is healthy. He is loved. You have no right." But they did not listen. The officers stepped forward, one of them reaching for Jakub. I backed away, holding him tighter. Don't touch him. Please, don't touch my baby. The supervisor's tone was calm, almost rehearsed. Ma'am, you must cooperate. If you resist, the police will be called. Jakub's cries grew louder. Mama! Mama! His voice pierced the air like a knife, breaking me into 1,000 pieces. They pried him from my arms, his tiny fingers clawing at my shirt. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing so violently that I could barely breathe. I reached out, begging, screaming, but the door closed between us. The silence that followed was unbearable. My arms ached as if a part of my body had been ripped away. When Marek came home and saw me crumpled on the floor, his face drained of color. Where is he? Anna, where is Jakub? I could barely speak. They took him. Marek's scream shook the walls. He punched the door, his fists bloodying against the wood. Then he sank beside me, holding me as we both broke apart. That night, our home was emptier than death itself. Jakub's crib stood silent in the corner. His toy car lay abandoned on the rug. The walls seemed to echo with his absence. I lay awake until dawn, listening for a cry that would never come. The fight began the very next day. Marek contacted a lawyer recommended by our Polish church community. He also reached out to the Polish embassy in Oslo, desperate for help. I created a social media page, Justice for Jakub, posting photos of him laughing, eating, playing. I wrote in broken English, "They took my baby because I feed him with my hands. Please help me." The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from Poland, from immigrant families across Norway, even from strangers in other countries. Some shared their own stories of losing children to Barnevernet. Others promised prayers, signatures on petitions, or offers to protest outside government offices. But despite the outpouring of support, the system moved slowly. Too slowly. The first court hearing was held 3 weeks later. By then, my body felt like an empty shell. Every morning, I woke expecting to hear Jakub's little feet on the floor, his voice calling Mama. But every morning, I faced only silence. In court, the judge barely looked at me. The Velferd officers presented their reports, unsafe feeding practices. Overdependence on the mother. Living space inadequate. Risk of developmental delay. I tried to speak, to explain that feeding by hand was not neglect, but love. My voice shook so badly that the words came out in fragments. I love him. It is our tradition. My mother, my grandmother, all mothers in Poland. The judge looked impatient. He tapped his pen and said, "We will continue temporary custody until further evaluation." My heart shattered all over again. After the hearing, I collapsed into Marek's arms in the hallway. They don't see me. They don't see him. They only see a case. Marek held me tight, whispering through his own tears, "We won't stop, Anna. We will fight for him. Even if it takes everything." The weeks turned into months. We were allowed only short, supervised visits with Jakub. An hour here, an hour there, always in the presence of an officer who scribbled notes as if love could be measured on paper. Jakub ran to me every time, his little arms wrapping around my neck. He would cry when the visit ended, screaming for me as they carried him away. I would walk out of the building with my heart bleeding, my arms aching with emptiness once again. I began to sink into despair. Some nights, I sat by his crib, holding his tiny clothes, inhaling his scent that was slowly fading. I whispered prayers into the silence, "God, please don't let him forget me. Please don't let him forget my voice, my love. Marek tried to stay strong, but I could see the cracks forming. He worked longer hours to pay for legal fees, his body exhausted, his spirit heavy. Sometimes he blamed himself. If I had earned more, maybe they wouldn't say the house is too small. If I had fought harder that day, maybe they wouldn't have taken him. I told him it wasn't his fault, but deep down, guilt ate at both of us. Hope flickered one day when a cultural expert from Poland agreed to testify on our behalf. She was a child development specialist, and when she heard our story, she was outraged. Feeding by hand is not neglect, she said firmly. It is tradition. It is bonding. It is love. Her words gave us strength. At the next hearing, she stood in front of the judge and explained, calmly and clearly, that many cultures feed children this way during early years, and that it posed no harm to Jakub's health or development. For the first time, I saw the judge pause. He leaned back, listening more carefully than before. But the battle was not over. Velferd insisted that immigrant traditions could not override Norwegian standards. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Every night, I clung to the hope that one day I would hold Jakub again. That one day, his laughter would return to our home. That one day, Norway would see that love cannot be measured by spoons or forks. The fight consumed us. Protests were organized outside the Velferd offices. Polish media covered our case, calling it an injustice. Social media campaigns grew louder, with thousands using the hashtag Justice for Jakub. And yet, inside, I was still a mother whose arms were empty. Every day without him felt like a year. Every silence in our home was louder than thunder. Looking back, that period of my life feels like a blur of tears, paperwork, courtrooms, and endless waiting. But one moment remains sharp in my memory: the day the judge finally leaned forward, looked me in the eyes, and said words that gave me a flicker of hope. The courtroom was cold that morning, its walls high and unforgiving, like the system itself. Marek squeezed my hand as we walked inside, both of us trembling. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. This was it. Months of pain, sleepless nights, and desperate prayers had all led to this moment. I glanced at the table where the Velferd officers sat. Their faces were blank, their files stacked neatly in front of them. To them, we were not a family, not a mother, a father, and a child, we were a case number, a report, a list of concerns. When Jakub entered, led by a foster caretaker, my breath caught. He was only 1.5 years old, but in the months away from us, he seemed older, quieter. His eyes searched the room, and when they landed on me, they widened. "Mama," he cried, stretching out his little arms. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to never let go. But the officer pulled him back gently, shaking her head. I felt my heart shatter again, and I clutched Marek's hand so tightly I thought I might break his fingers. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. The Velferd officers spoke first, their words sharp and cold. They repeated the same accusations we had heard before: unsafe feeding practices, dependency on the mother, inadequate housing. They presented charts, reports, and photos, each one painting us as unfit parents. When they finished, I felt as though the walls were closing in. My voice trembled as I stood to speak. "Your Honor, I am not a perfect mother. But I am a loving mother. Everything I do is for my son. Feeding him with my hand is not neglect, it is love. It is how I was raised, how generations before me raised their children. Jakub is not weak. He is strong, he is healthy, and he is happy because he knows he is loved." I looked at Jakub as I spoke, tears blurring my vision. He reached out to me again, whispering, "Mama," and I almost broke. Then our cultural expert stood. She spoke calmly, clearly, with authority. "Hand feeding is not dangerous. In fact, in many cultures, including Poland, it is an expression of closeness, a natural step in a child's development. To punish parents for this is to punish love itself. If this child were still in Poland, no one would question the care he receives. He would be praised as healthy and thriving. We must remember, parenting is not one culture's monopoly. It is universal. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, his pen still in his hand. For the first time, I saw him truly listening. The arguments went on for hours. My body shook with every word, my hope rising and falling like waves. Marek sat stiffly beside me, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with restrained fury. We had both reached the edge of exhaustion, but we held on, for Jakub. Finally, the judge spoke. His voice was calm, but every word struck my heart. Parenting must be understood within cultural context. Feeding a child with the hand, as described here, is a cultural practice, not an act of neglect. This court finds no evidence that Jakub Kowalski has suffered harm under his parents' care. On the contrary, evidence suggests he is loved, nourished, and bonded with his parents. Therefore, this court orders that Jakub be returned to his mother and father immediately. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air like a miracle I didn't dare believe. Then they sank in. My knees gave way, and Marek caught me as tears poured down my face. "Anna, we did it. We did it," he whispered, his own voice cracking. Jakub broke free from the caretaker's hands and ran toward me. I dropped to the floor, catching him in my arms, sobbing into his hair. His little hands held my cheeks as he said over and over, "Mama, Mama, Mama." Marek knelt beside us, wrapping his arms around both of us. For the first time in months, we were whole again. The room disappeared. The officers, the judge, the walls, all of it faded. There was only Jakub's heartbeat against mine, only his scent, only his laughter through tears. I whispered into his ear, "I will never let you go again. Never." The days that followed were filled with both relief and sorrow. We brought Jakub home, back to his little crib, back to his wooden toy car, back to the warmth of our arms. He clung to me constantly, afraid I might disappear again. At night, he refused to sleep in his crib, insisting on curling between Marek and me, his small body pressed tightly against mine. And I let him, because I needed it just as much as he did. But even as joy returned to our home, the scars remained. Marek and I would wake in the night, terrified by phantom knocks on the door. I would watch Jakub play, and my heart would twist with fear that someone might try to take him again. I thought about all the other mothers I met in waiting rooms, their faces hollow with grief, their children taken without warning. Some of them never got their little ones back. Some were still fighting. Some had lost hope entirely. We were lucky. But luck should not decide whether a child grows up with his parents or in the arms of strangers. One evening, as I watched Jakub sleep, I began to write again in my journal. April 28th, today, Jakub came home. He ran into my arms and held me so tightly I thought my heart would burst. The court said our culture is not neglect. They saw the truth. But why did we have to fight so hard just to prove love? Why must mothers like me beg for the right to raise their own children? I closed the journal and kissed Jakub's forehead. They said feeding you with my hands was unsafe, I whispered. But I know the truth. My hands are where you have always been safest. In my hands, you learn to laugh. In my hands, you learn to trust. And in my hands, you will always find love. Marek placed his arm around my shoulders. We survived, Anna. But we must not forget. There are others who are still suffering. Maybe one day, our story will give them strength. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. Yes. Our fight was not just for us. It was for every parent who has been silenced, every child taken for being different, every family judged not by love, but by rules that don't understand them. As I tell this story now, Jakub is laughing again, running around our living room with his toy car, his cheeks flushed with happiness. The sound fills our home once more, chasing away the silence that haunted us for months. But I know one thing with certainty, we will never forget what happened. We will never forget the day they took him, nor the day he was returned. That is why I speak. That is why I share. Because the world must know that love cannot be judged by cultural lines. That no mother should ever be told her way of nurturing is neglect. They tried to erase our traditions, but in the end, the truth stood firm: love is universal. Love is not neglect. Love is the strongest defense any child can ever have. And as I hold Jakub in my arms now, feeding him gently, I know this with all my heart: he will grow up never doubting that his parents fought for him, that our love was greater than any wall, any report, any judgment. They said my hands were unsafe. But in the end, my hands are what brought him home. If this story moved you, let your like show that love is not neglect. Subscribe to stand with families who refuse to be silenced, and share this video so more people know the truth. Together, we can keep these stories alive, and remind the world that a child's safest place will always be in their parents' arms.